It was a cold fall afternoon when Sophia, a determined young woman full of dreams, found herself in front of the huge gates of the Marquez mansion. Everything there seemed bigger and more imposing than anything she had ever seen. The immense stone building had huge windows and an impeccable garden, with flowers that still resisted the change of season. She wondered if she had made the right choice in taking that job as a nanny, but she knew she had to try. Her family was counting on her, and this job offered an opportunity she couldn't refuse. Sophia's story was simple, but full of courage. She had grown up in a small village, where every day was a struggle to make ends meet. Her father worked in the fields, her mother helped out wherever she could, and Sophia did her best to help out with little jobs here and there. She dreamed of improving their lives, of offering them a more comfortable and less suffering life. And that's how she made the decision to leave her home and venture into the big city. Upon entering the mansion, Sophia was greeted by the housekeeper, a kind-eyed lady called Margot, who led her down long corridors. With each step, Sophia felt smaller in that world of wealth and sophistication. Everything was so different from what she was used to. The housekeeper explained that her boss, Pierre Marquez, had been in mourning since his wife died. He was a reserved and serious man, but she soon noticed that his heart was good, even if it was hidden behind a deep sadness. Sophia then met Anthony, the boy who would now be her responsibility. He was only 6 years old, but his eyes carried a seriousness that was surprising. Since his mother had left, he had become a quiet, almost solitary child, hiding behind a silence that seemed bigger than him. Sophia knew that winning Anthony's affection would not be an easy task, but she was determined to be a safe and loving presence for him, someone he could count on. Sophia's first meeting with Pierre was brief but intense. He was a tall man, with a serious expression and a distant look, as if he was always somewhere else. The few words he exchanged with her were formal and dry, but Sophia noticed something in his eyes, a mixture of pain and resistance. Pierre didn't want to get involved with anyone else. His pain had made him distant and closed off from the world. Sophia wanted to bring a new energy into the house. She wanted Anthony, the boy she was now looking after, to be able to live a happy childhood, even without his mother. And perhaps, she thought, she could even help Pierre rediscover the value of small joys, those simple moments that could gradually help him emerge from the shadows of grief. With each passing day, Sophia gradually won little Anthony's trust. With patience and affection, she made him laugh from time to time and encouraged him to play outdoors, to rediscover the joy of being a child. Pierre watched from afar, without interfering, but always attentive. He saw the subtle transformation that Sophia was bringing to that previously silent house, and it touched him in a way that he couldn't understand or explain. Sophia knew that life there wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to keep going. The Marquez mansion had its shadows, but she also saw small signs of light, especially in Anthony's shy smile and Pierre's discreet, almost imperceptible glances. One day, she suggested to Anthony that they take a walk in the garden, enjoying the morning sun. The boy hesitated, looked at her without answering, but when he saw Sophia's gentle smile, he decided to follow her. They walked slowly among the flowers and bushes, and Sophia began to tell him little stories about the plants, inventing that each flower held a magical secret or a unique story. Little by little, Anthony began to take an interest, and at one point, he even gave a slight smile, enchanted by the simplicity of the storytelling. Sophia knew that that smile, however brief, was a breakthrough, a sign that he was beginning to trust her. From that day on, she created special moments where they could share small gestures and laugh. She taught Anthony to watch the clouds and imagine shapes in the sky, told him stories about animals, and about her own simple life in the village where she grew up. They were quiet moments, but full of meaning. Anthony, who had always seemed distant before, began to get closer and, little by little, shared some of his memories of his mother, always in a low voice, almost as if he were talking to himself. Sophia listened carefully, understanding the value of every word he said. She never pushed him to tell her more than he wanted. She was just there, offering a silent caress, a welcoming look and, every now and then, a light hug. She knew that this bond they were building was special. Antony, although he didn't know it yet, was beginning to see Sophia as a support figure, someone who was there for him, willing to fill part of the void left by his mother's absence. This bond transformed not only Antony, but also Sophia. She felt responsible for bringing joy back into the boy's life, and this made her see the importance of her presence in the house. As the days went by, Sophia began to notice small gestures from Pierre that indicated a subtle change. At first, he was always formal and distant, as if trying to keep an invisible barrier between himself and any other human being. His steps were silent, his glances were brief and reserved, and he seemed lost in his own pain. Gradually, however, something began to change. One morning, when Sophia was with Antony in the garden, observing the flowers that were beginning to bloom in the new season, Pierre appeared without her expecting it. He stood still for a moment, watching the two of them together, with an almost bland expression. She didn't say anything, but she noticed that Pierre seemed more relaxed, as if he was genuinely enjoying the scene. At that moment, something shifted in the air. As if for the first time, he saw the warmth that Sophia was bringing into his son's life. The other day, while Sophia was organizing the books on the large bookshelf in the library, she heard a slight movement behind her. It was Pierre, holding a cup of tea that he had prepared himself. He handed it to her, mentioning that he had noticed how she spent hours on end entertaining Antony and helping with the housework. "A little thank you for what you're doing," he said, a little shyly. Sophia smiled, surprised and grateful, understanding the weight of that simple gesture coming from someone so reserved. These moments continued to happen, almost like little surprises in the midst of everyday life. One afternoon, when Sophia and Antony were finishing drawing, Pierre joined them for a few minutes, observing the child's work and commenting gently on the details of the drawing. His tone was lighter, as if he was allowing himself, however briefly, to connect with his son's joy. Sophia noticed the discreet gleam in his eyes, a gleam that seemed to flicker on and off, like a spark trying to overcome the darkness. Sophia felt that, although Pierre still carried an immense weight in his heart, he was gradually recognizing her presence, not just as someone who helped with Antony, but as someone who was making a difference in that house. There were moments when he would meet her gaze unexpectedly, and Sophia would notice a softness, a touch of gratitude that he conveyed without words. Even when they exchanged few words, Sophia felt the impact of those gestures. They were small but full of meaning. It was as if he was carefully trying to open a door he had locked a long time ago. Sophia understood that this was his way of saying that he was grateful, and that perhaps he was finding a new way of seeing the world around him. She knew that Pierre's pain was still present, but these gestures indicated that, even little by little, he was beginning to allow new emotions to emerge. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you're subscribed to our channel, because the next ones are going to be even more exciting, and you can't miss them. So let's keep going. The days turned into weeks and, almost without realizing it, Sophia and Pierre began to share more moments. They weren't planned meetings, but casual, natural encounters that turned into something more. Sometimes it was in the living room, while Antony dozed off, sometimes in the garden, as the afternoon sun began to descend over the horizon. Pierre, once so reserved, now seemed to seek out her company, even if it was just to exchange a few words or watch her play with Antony. For Sophia, these moments were like little treasures that she kept in her heart. She was surprised by the affection and attention she began to feel for Pierre. With every conversation, every discreet smile, she felt that something special was being born between them. He had a seriousness in his gaze, a quiet respect that made her feel valued. And at the same time, there was something soft in his voice when he spoke to her, something that made her shiver slightly. Pierre, for his part, was beginning to open up to feelings he had thought he had lost. The joy that Sophia brought to Antony seemed to spread throughout the house, reaching the darkness in which he lived. He realized that, in her presence, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced for a long time. Sophia's lightness contrasted with the weight he carried, and this difference attracted him in a way he could hardly explain. Every smile she gave him was like a ray of sunshine, a reminder that there was still beauty in the world, that he could perhaps find something other than sadness. One evening, while Pierre was in his office, immersed in papers and memories, he heard a laugh coming from the next room. It was Sophia laughing with Antony. He approached quietly and stood in the doorway, watching her unnoticed. She was telling an amusing story, gesturing animatedly, while Antony laughed, relaxed and happy. Pierre couldn't remember the last time they had heard such hearty laughter in his home. At that moment, he felt his heart beating harder, as if something inside him was waking up. The next day, Sophia and Pierre met in the garden, where she was picking some flowers to decorate the dining table. He approached her and, without saying much, began to help her. Sophia felt her hands tremble a little at seeing him so close, but she continued, trying to keep calm. They were silent, but there was something in the exchange of glances, something unspoken that made the air around them almost palpable. Sophia couldn't hide the joy she felt at seeing him open up, at seeing that strong, serious man begin to show a softer side, a side she was beginning to admire deeply. Pierre, for his part, began to look for excuses to be near Sophia. He found himself observing her details, the way she smiled, the way she treated Antony with such affection, the way her face lit up at the slightest kind gesture. They both knew, even if in silence, that something special was happening between them. It was a feeling that grew slowly, with patience and respect, but that enveloped them like a gentle breeze, bringing the possibility of a new beginning, something that both of them, in their loneliness and wounds, had never imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Sophia's heart was filled with a deep and sincere love for Pierre. She felt her heart warm every time their gazes met, every time he surprised her with a kind gesture or a discreet smile. But as this feeling grew, a restlessness accompanied it. As much as she wanted to believe that Pierre could reciprocate her affection, there was one thing she could never ignore: her position in the house. She was just the nanny, a simple young woman who had come from a humble life, and he the lord of the manor, a man marked by pain and status. This reality hit her harder every day, making the love she felt for him bittersweet. Sophia knew she couldn't and shouldn't let herself get carried away by this hope. In a grand mansion like that, everything seemed more intense, including the consequences of an impossible love. She feared that by showing her feelings, she would be misunderstood, that the people around her, and perhaps even Pierre, might see her as someone who wanted something that didn't belong to her, who was after a life that wasn't hers. This fear made her retreat at times. There were days when Sophia forced herself to keep a discreet distance, to be professional, as if she were just an ordinary employee. But this barrier she tried to create was fragile, because Pierre, without realizing it, seemed to break it every time he spoke to her in that soft voice, or looked at her with that discreet affection that she so longed to understand. He also seemed to seek out her company, and this confused her. She wanted to believe that he felt something for her, that they somehow shared a special bond that had sprung up between them. But the fear of judgment and rejection made her doubt every little sign. Sophia spent nights awake, reliving those moments in her mind and questioning her own decisions. She wondered what would happen if she revealed what she really felt. What if Pierre rejected her? What if he fired her? She wouldn't be able to go back to her village with her head held high if that happened. And besides, she couldn't bear the thought of being away from Antony and everything she had built there. Despite all her fears, Sophia couldn't help but hope that Pierre might see her as more than an employee. But her own conscience was her biggest obstacle. The world around them seemed to be divided into invisible walls that separated them. And the feeling that was growing inside her seemed to be a secret that she should keep to herself, no matter how painful it was. So Sophia continued to live in this dilemma, between what she felt and what she knew she had to do. Her love was sincere and deep, but the social constraints and risks made her hesitate. She found herself caught between the desire to be honest with her feelings and the fear of losing everything she had achieved. This was the weight she carried in her heart, a weight made up of love, hope, and a bitter caution, which made her day after day keep the love she felt guarded in the silence of her heart. After many sleepless nights and days of anguish, Sophia made a decision that broke her heart. She could no longer live with the love kept in silence and the weight of the invisible barriers that separated her from Pierre. So, with a crushed heart, she decided it would be best to leave. Perhaps, she thought, distancing herself would help her find peace and preserve what remained of her pride and tranquility. That morning, as the sun rose and tinted the sky with golden hues, Sophia began to pack her things with trembling hands. Each piece of clothing folded, each object stored in the suitcase, seemed like another piece of the life she was leaving behind. The hardest part, however, was facing Antony. The boy looked at her, confused, not understanding why his beloved Nanny was leaving. He held her hand tightly, as if that simple touch could convince her to stay. "Why do you have to go, Sophia?" asked Antony, his eyes watering. Sophia stroked his face and held back the tears, trying to keep her voice steady. "Because sometimes, in order to take care of ourselves, we need to take new paths, my little one," she replied affectionately. Although she knew it was difficult for him to understand, she hoped he would somehow feel that this was necessary. When it was her turn to say goodbye to Pierre, the heaviness in her heart increased. He was standing in front of her, serious, his eyes fixed on hers. Sophia could see the pain mixed with surprise in his gaze. Pierre seemed to struggle to find the right words, but instead the silence between them was filled with everything they had never said. She knew he felt something, but she also knew that it was impossible for both of them to break the ties that separated them. "Thank you for everything, Sophia," he said at last, his voice restrained but his eyes showing his sadness. "I don't know if I can express how much you've meant to me and to Antony." Sophia nodded, feeling her heart break a little more. She knew she was leaving with much more than memories. She was also carrying the weight of a love that could never be lived, a feeling that would remain locked away in her heart. As Sophia walked through the gate, Pierre remained where he was, watching her disappear into the distance. Every step she took seemed to tear away a piece of his life, as if, with her departure, she was taking with her the warmth and light that had slowly filled the house. In the solitude of that moment, Pierre realized that his life, once so full of shadows and silence, had found new meaning in her presence. Now, with her gone, the emptiness was growing again, and he felt a tightness in his chest, an ache he had never expected to feel again. With Sophia gone, Pierre finally understood the extent of his feelings. She hadn't just been a nanny or a friend to Antony. She had become the heart of the house, the bridge that connected his lonely world to a new hope. And now, with her gone, Pierre felt that something essential had been torn from his life. The pain of seeing her go was almost as great as the loss that had made him isolate himself. He, who had closed himself off from the world for so long, discovered too late that her presence had become essential to him. As Pierre stared at the empty road, he knew he needed courage to face this new loss. Perhaps, he thought, there was still a way to correct his mistakes. In the days that followed Sophia's departure, the mansion fell into an even deeper silence. Every corner, every corridor seemed empty, devoid of the joy and lightness she had brought with her. Pierre walked through the house, feeling the weight of her absence like an unbearable void. It was as if life itself had left that place. Antony also seemed lost, constantly asking when Sophia would return, and Pierre, in silence, without an answer, wondered the same thing, but with an even greater weight. Every memory of her tormented him. The sound of Sophia's laughter as she played with Antony, the softness of her voice when she told stories, the sparkle in her eyes as she shared the small moments of everyday life. Everything about her had won him over in an unexpected and profound way. And now he finally understood how much she meant to him. Sophia had filled a space in his heart that he didn't even know still existed, a place he thought would be forever empty after the loss of his wife. He realized that he had let her go out of fear, hesitation, pride, and an attachment to conventions that now seemed completely meaningless to him. What did her status matter? What did it matter what others would think? The reality was that he loved her, and for the first time in a long time, Pierre felt the urgency to fight for what really mattered to him. Determined not to waste any more time, Pierre made a decision he never thought he would. He would leave the mansion, put his pride aside, and find her. He needed to tell Sophia how much she meant to him, how much her presence had changed his life. The mansion, with all its luxury and grandeur, seemed cold and empty without her, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get her back. The next morning, before sunrise, Pierre prepared to leave. He organized his thoughts, mentally going over every word he wanted to say to her, even though his heart felt tight with anxiety. He knew that finding Sophia wouldn't be easy. She had returned to her village, and the distance seemed long and uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a new energy, a determination that made him see clearly what he needed to do. The journey was much more than just a trip. It was proof of how much he was willing to do for that love that had been born in silence, without him realizing it. As he got on the road, Pierre realized that it didn't matter how long it took him to find her, or how hard he had to fight the words he had never said before. He knew that the moment he saw Sophia again, he would say everything he kept inside, everything he had never had the courage to reveal. He needed her to know how essential she was in his life, and how much he wanted her to return to the mansion, not as a simple nanny, but as the woman he loved. As the carriage made its way through the landscapes that stretched as far as the village, Pierre felt hope growing in his chest, and along with it, a love that he could no longer deny. After a long and tiring journey, Pierre finally reached the village where Sophia had grown up. It was a simple place, with humble houses and dirt roads. The contrast between the grandeur of his mansion and the simplicity of the place was obvious. But for Pierre, that didn't matter anymore. He had just one goal: to find Sophia and tell her everything he felt, all the love he kept in silence. After a few questions to the locals, Pierre discovered the small house where Sophia was staying. When he reached the entrance, he took a deep breath, feeling his heart racing. He didn't know how she would react, or if she would be willing to listen to him, but he knew he had to try. With a soft knock on the door, he waited, and in a few seconds Sophia appeared. The first look was one of surprise. She hadn't expected to see him there, and her expression of surprise soon mixed with a mixture of emotion and hesitation. Pierre felt his chest warm at seeing her again, feeling that this was the most important moment of his life. Before she could say anything, he began to speak, the words coming out with an urgency he had never felt before. "Sophia, I know this may be the last thing you expected, but I needed to come here. I need you to know that since you left, everything has changed. The house has become empty, joyless without you. I realized that you had become much more than someone who looked after Antony or helped out around the house. You became the very reason that everything seemed lighter, that I found hope again." Sophia, her eyes shining, seemed to be trying to absorb every word as he continued. "I didn't know I could still feel something so strong, so true. I fell in love with you, Sophia. And it was only with your departure that I realized how essential you are to me. I've come here to tell you that I love you and that, if you let me, I'm willing to face anything with you. I don't care about conventions, about self-imposed limitations. I just want to be with you." Tears began to roll down Sophia's face. She had heard every word like a melody, like a dream that she herself had been afraid to believe. Deep down, she had always been afraid that her love would be impossible. But now, listening to Pierre, all her fears seemed to disappear. She took a deep breath and, her voice breaking, replied, "Pierre, I never imagined that you felt the same way. I tried to fight it. I tried to convince myself that my love was a burden, a meaningless hope. But during all those days away, I realized how much you mean to me. My heart didn't want to let me go, but I was too afraid that maybe it could never be more than an illusion." They were face to face, so close that they could feel each other's breathing. On an impulse, Pierre grabbed her hands and looked deep into her eyes, with a firmness and tenderness she had never seen before. "So, Sophia, please stay by my side. We'll face everything together. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want to face it with you." Without hesitation, Sophia nodded with an emotional smile. They embraced each other with all the intensity of feelings that had been contained for so long, an embrace that sealed their commitment to face challenges and differences together. At that moment, under the simple starry sky of the village, there was no mansion, no social divisions, just two hearts that met and finally allowed themselves to love without reservation. And there, in that tight embrace, they promised themselves that, no matter what came, they would face the challenges hand in hand, united by the love that, despite so many difficulties, had been born, had grown, and was now blossoming with the intensity of a new hope. Under the starry sky of that simple village, Pierre and Sophia stood together, holding hands, their hearts still racing after the mutual confession of feelings that had seemed to have been contained for so long. The moment was full of emotion, of a silent certainty that their lives were finally intertwined by something stronger than any obstacle. Pierre looked deep into Sophia's eyes, which shone with the intensity of love and happiness. He caressed her face, feeling the softness of her skin, the warmth that radiated from her gaze. It was as if, at that moment, all the suffering, all the doubts and limitations had dissipated. There, in front of him, he saw a woman who had transformed his life, who had brought joy and hope to a heart that he believed would forever be trapped in mourning. Sophia, for her part, could hardly contain her emotion. She had always known deep down that she had deep feelings for Pierre, but she had never imagined that he could reciprocate this love. The fact that he had crossed all distances, overcoming fears and conventions to find her, to declare his love, made her feel like she was in a dream. In a delicate gesture full of intensity, Pierre leaned towards her, their faces so close that they could feel each other's breathing. For a brief moment, they both hesitated, almost as if the moment was too precious to be rushed. But then gently, Pierre moved even closer and touched Sophia's lips in a deep, passionate kiss. The kiss was more than just a show of affection. It was the promise of a new beginning, of a shared life. It was the meeting of two souls who, despite all the difficulties, had found in each other a reason to move on, to build something new full of hope. Every second of that moment seemed to carry all the words that had never been spoken, all the guarded feelings that were now expressed in a pure and intense way. When the kiss ended, they still looked at each other, smiling, feeling as if they were ready to face the world, as long as they were together. Pierre held Sophia's hands firmly and declared, "From now on, It doesn't matter what the future brings. We'll face everything together." Sophia nodded, her eyes filled with joy and a sense of renewal. They knew it wouldn't be an easy journey. They knew they would face challenges and that their lives, from such different backgrounds, would require strength and resilience. But none of that scared them anymore. They were ready to start a new story, a life in which difficulties would be overcome by the love they felt. And so the two of them, hand in hand, walked together through the village towards the new future that awaited them. The light of the stars illuminated them, as a reminder that no matter the darkness, there is always a light waiting to guide those who have the courage to love. And with every step, they knew that love and resilience would be their greatest strength to face whatever lay ahead, together forever. I hope you enjoyed this fascinating story. So subscribe to our channel and take the opportunity to watch the video on your screen now. See you next time.